as is typical, monasteries are houses of grace. And they're houses of prayer. And before I lead you in a prayer, I'm going to share something. And that's that, and I'll tell you the rest of the story in a second, but I want to open with this. That there was a woman who was a writer. She lives in Ohio. And her kids and her husband were gone over Christmas break. She was kind of lost, and she didn't know exactly what to do with herself. She was what they call a lapsed Catholic. And so after 20 years of not going into a Catholic church, for whatever reason, she picked a church that Christmas because she didn't want to be alone. So she walks into this church, and it was filled with kind of like God's odds and ends. It was hardly many people there, and so she kind of went in and she hung in the back. And she, the Mass is full of rituals. And one of the rituals is the bringing of the bread and wine to the altar. And somehow she got brought into that. And she thought, she can't do this because she doesn't really belong here. And there were only like 20 people in the church. So the priest knew everybody. And when she came up there to hand the bread in, he started laughing and he said, "Surprise." And she thought, a laughing priest, where did that come from? When it came time for communion, she thought, I can't go. I don't deserve to go. I can't possibly go. I've been gone too long and I don't know. Maybe I just radiate sin, but I can't go. So when the priest came to give communion, instead of going to his flock of 20 odds and ends, he went to the wall, opened a door, and put his hand through to give communion to whom? And she's watching, and it was a cloistered community of nuns. She was shocked. She lived in that town all her life. And she's watching this, and she thought, who lives there? She had to know. Now she's thinking like a journalist. Who lives in that wall? She had to know. So now she wasn't a person who was alone on Christmas. Now she engages the journalist in her. So she doesn't feel awkward in church anymore. Now she decides she had a purpose to be there. After Mass, she comes up to the priest and she said, who was that? And he says, well, why don't you come back? Let me get out of this garb and come speak to me. So after that, she meets him behind in the rectory, and by this time he put on his clothing. He was a Franciscan. He wasn't just an archdiocesan. He's got the hood on. They look like Friar Tuck, right? They're sexy. Got the cord. They're cute. They're cute. I love Franciscans. I love their habit. I was educated by Franciscans till I was 13. So got the cord and the hood. And so he says, well, those are Poor Clares, who are the counterpart to the Franciscans, the Sisters of Clare. And she said, what are they doing there? What do you mean? And she said, well, they're cloistered. They can't come out. They don't come out. They've taken a vow. And she said, I've lived here all my life. How long have they, what are you talking about? And he says, well, they're in there. They don't come out? No. Well, what do they do there? They pray. Well, what? For whom? And he looks right at her and says, for you. For you. That's what they do. That's what they do here. They pray for you. So when you look at the monks and the nuns, that's what they do. And I am convinced that this world would have broken in two if it wasn't for them. And for all the holy people that are called, and I do mean called, to this world to pray for those who do not pray for themselves. To pick up the shattered pieces So hover over us, God. Give us grace. Give us grace to not have bitter hearts, to not have rage in us, to let go of that, to let go of the things that make us small and petty, to let go of the things that make us not see others, to make our life a Camino. That is the hardest choice you can be, is to be a bigger person. To be a bigger person. Make me generous of heart and soul. Amen. Now, when I was in church this morning for morning song, I had it broke my heart. It broke my heart. Because in so many ways, and then at the same time, there it was. This was on my bucket list. It was on my bucket list because I have a deep devotion to Catholic mysticism and to mysticism. Not just Catholic, but mysticism. And why is that? Because whether it's the mystical tradition of Buddhism, or Judaism, or Hinduism, or any ism, what you find in the mystical tradition are the jewels of truth. So that if I'm teaching you Buddhism and I'm doing a good job, or I'm teaching you Christian mysticism and I'm really doing a good job, you can't tell which tradition I'm coming from. If I'm really doing a good job. If I'm doing a good job. And all great truths have to come from somewhere. They had to incarnate through somebody. So obviously they're going to take on the flavor of the person heaven chose to deliver them. So I'm very much aware that I'm a Christian Catholic. And oftentimes I have to siphon that out. But at the end of the day, I am ultimately a cosmic mystic who's become a fine bottle of wine by this time. You know, my grapes have been crushed. Okay? And now, as Lori would say, I'm a good bottle of wine. You know, she's our sommelier. So, it's time to teach that God has no religion. This is part of that journey of truth, of getting to the place where your soul can comprehend. My soul does not have a religion, and if I force a religion into my soul, I'm going to do battle. I'm going to do battle. My ego may want a religion because it gives me a language, it gives me a power zone, but my soul cannot tolerate a religion. What my soul craves are the mystical truths that are hidden in every religion. That's what my soul wants. So when I stood in church, I'm going to go back and say there are several people here are from what I would call the Chartres family, because for 10 years I've taught at Chartres in France for during the summer in a mystery school that we recreated from the time that was once 1,000 years ago when they put together a mystery school based on what the Greeks taught. It was utterly delicious. And Paul and Freddie are there, and Joyce, and there's several Chartres people. And the Chartres Cathedral also has a Black Madonna. So this is very much a part of the mysticism that I need to address here, because nothing is insignificant. And she's different than a regular Madonna, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that cathedral was put together so consciously for reasons of that there was a fire, it was a time of a crusade. They believed that because the Madonna, that her veil, a relic, survived the fire, that there was divine intervention. Now I want to hit a pause button on the concept of divine intervention and say to you that that is something that all of you need to acknowledge you are looking for. So put those words down. Divine intervention. So I'm not talking about a historic concept. I am now addressing you. All of you are looking for some form and will always look for some form of divine intervention in your life. You will always look for some form in healing. You will always look for some form of divine intervention through grace, through some form of acknowledgement that you are not living a meaningless life. That somehow there is something greater than you that knows you are alive. That you're not an apple that fell loosely from a tree sometime in the 20th century, that managed to roll into the 21st century, but that you matter. You may not know to whom or why, but you can't bear, really, none of us can, to think we walk this earth insignificantly. So divine intervention is something we look for, whether or not we realize it. And that is what's part of our life journey. And that is something, number two, you're going to open a little window in you, like opening a little window in your soul, that you realize that's something I share with everybody. This ties me to everybody. And instead of the word internet, you're going to use internet. On my internet. On my internet. I am exactly like everyone else. Because like everyone else, I am looking for heaven to call me by name. To call me by name. I want to hear that in some way. I want to hear that in some way. Everyone in a monastery has been called by name, and that's why they're here, and that's what they'll tell you. Just for fun, I'm going to finish that story. The journalist, when she said to this Franciscan, and she said, well, how long have they been here? And he said, some of the sisters, the Poor Clares, have been here 65 years. And immediately she thought, I've got to do a story on this. I have to. This is just too good. So he said, Mother Michael, the abbess, has been here like 67 years. And she went, 67, 77, 87. I have to do a story on her. Said, she's never left that building? No. Since the time she entered? No. And she said, that's it. Get me an interview with her. To which this priest said, well, that's not going to happen. Why? Because she's busy. This journalist says, busy? Busy? She never leaves that building. She says, I'm busy. I have a husband. I have I have 2 children. The usual. And he looks at her and says, I gotta go. So she shows up the next week thinking, well, maybe if I bake a cake, maybe if I do this. She shows up the next week. She writes a letter to Sister Michael. And the priest said, I'll give it to her. And of course, she shows up the next week. No answer, no, nothing. Shows up the next week. So then finally she decides, and now but she keeps telling herself she's not part of this community of odds and ends. Then she decides, it's driving her crazy. It's driving her crazy. She can't get in. And she's fascinated, like, what are they doing in there? What are they doing in there? How could they possibly live in a box for 68 years and never come out? What are they doing in there? She reads up on the Poor Clares. I've got to get in there. So she decides, I've got to do a story on this church. This church that's attached to these nuns who pray for us. So she does this story, hits the newspaper. There's this church, and it's falling apart, and it's filled with God's odds and ends, and it's run by this Franciscan priest, and it's filled with these nuns who pray for you. Well, the church fills up. Just fills up, and now it's brimming with people who want to be prayed for. Who don't pray for themselves, mind you. Oh, they're not going to do that. But it's, sister, please pray for me. I don't think I want to pray for myself, but hey, I'll make a donation, you pray for me. Because you must somehow or other be closer to God than me, but I don't want to be that close to God. We'll deal with this in a minute. I don't want to be that close, because I don't want God to call me that close. I don't want it to cost me anything. I still want all my earth comfort zones. So do me a favor, you pray for me, and I'll finance you. Because that's what that's about. I don't want God to make me uncomfortable. You be uncomfortable and I'll finance you. Because that's what that's about. So next thing you know, the church is filled with people, and this reporter says, did Sister Michael notice? And he said, no. And so a year goes by. And now she's coming all the time. And she says, any word? No. Finally, almost 2 years, and he says, I got a letter from you. And Michael says, I'm busy. Yeah. It's too good. And she just sat there. And she just looked and what a human response. Didn't she see all I've done? Excuse me. And how many of you would have had that response? Yeah. Own it. Thank you. Okay. So, and this is interesting. You have to see yourself archetypally. You got to get that there's obviously stages. And this is the dark night of the soul. And if you understand the dark night, this is classic to John of the Cross, our other great Spanish saint. It says the first dark night is the beating down of your ego. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? That you should have all these privileges. That you should be recognized. That you should be so special. That somehow or other you need this and you need that and that. And in fact, that is exactly why all those things should be denied you. So you get a good grip on the size of your ego. Because you're nothing, says God. So that's exactly, you come face to face with how wretchedly out of shape you are and how bitter you are. And what you do when you're so bitter. And what you're capable of. And so she thought, well, there it is. And she finally gave up and she just started to come to church. And then she gets a letter from Michael. She says, I have time. That day, she thought, what am I going to wear? What do I wear? She had no idea she'd never see her. She thought, maybe I should wear blue. Maybe I should wear black. No, not black. They wear black. Maybe I should do this. She finally gets in to see the abbess. And she thought, well, no makeup, no, can't do that. And she comes in and she sits down and the screen opens. And she thought, where are you? And Michael said, why don't you ask me your questions? And she said, oh, okay, how long have you been in? And da-da-da-da. And Michael says, stop. She said, we don't have time for this. Why don't you just ask me what you really want to know? Soul to soul. And she said, how what did you hear? What could you possibly have heard that made you give up this for this? And she said, I was on my way to being a very famous, successful artist, and I knew that. She said, and I had an art show in Rome, and it was all set up, and I knew that I was going to hit it big. She said, I walked right in. She said, I saw it was all set up, and I went into St. Peter's to thank God for that. I walked in, and bam, he said, come to me. She said, and I stood there, and I turned around, and she said, I could see the studio. And I looked at the altar, and I could see the studio, and she said, I felt my soul go right out of me and right to him. She said, I never saw the studio again. She said, I turned around, I called up and said, sell anything. She said, I'd take it. She said, I want the money to go to the Carmelites. She said, I turned around, got on a plane, went home, and said to my family, I need to go. I mean, to the Poor Clares. And she said that, and it is the unexplainable. This too is something you're afraid of. Everybody is afraid of the unexplainable, mysterious voice that takes you into that place that you cannot describe to people, to the part of you that dwells in the rational world. You can't explain that. You can't explain it to yourself. You're afraid of madness. And it is a madness. It's a holy madness. And everyone is terrified of holy madness. Because there is a kind of, you want to go near it, you want to touch the statue. You want to, I went to Sai Baba's ashram. And I was just telling the girls a story of this. I went to Sai Baba's ashram. And there, people have almost hysteria. They had, I should say, when Baba was alive, of course, they had this hysteria about him. Absolute hysteria. I never witnessed anything like this in my life. Baba would turn his hand over and vibhuti would come out of his hand. And I actually saw that. And it wasn't a trick. It wasn't a trick. It was genuine. He just could not hold that much vibhuti between his fingers. It was just like, unless he severed his hand and it came out through a tube. But he blessed people, and there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And he held darshan twice a day. And they let you in the ashram, and believe it or not, for darshan in a very organized way. And they put you in rows and whatever. And so I was in the front row that day, and Baba comes in, and he walked this like in a Z, so you could kind of see, was he going to be on your side, or were you going to miss him that day? And in the way the Z was, I was going to miss him. He would have swung across and then come back, so I was in the wide part of the Z. Now, one of the things that the Indian people do is they write letters to Baba, hoping that he'll collect the letters. And as he walks through the crowd, he collected letters. And the first day there, I thought, I'm not going to do that. The second day, I'm not going to do that. And the third day, there was something in me that said, write that letter, write that letter. So I followed that instinct. And I thought, why am I writing this? And I wrote the letter. Why did I write the letter? Okay, all right, enough. So the why voice is, just note this, your why voice is the reptile on your shoulder. Your why voice is a reptile. Okay, so here comes Baba, and he's doing this, and he passed me by. And then all of a sudden, he turns around, and he walks back to me, And he says, give me your letter. And I thought I wouldn't, that this, some kind of, this would not happen to me. And I couldn't talk. And and I went like this. And he said, come on, give. That's all he said to me. Come on, give. And I gave like this. And I went, And I didn't see any food. He didn't give me anything, nothing. And like this, and I just sat there. I couldn't say a thing, nothing. And you realize, I'm not a Hindu. I was standing in front of a saint. And I knew, and I really went, and I just couldn't speak. I was energetically drooling. I was stunned. I lost it. And I just sat there. And I could not believe that I could not get over myself. And I said, pull yourself together. I was together. That's as together as I could be. And I realized, I've just seen a saint. And then after darshan, the Indian people poured over to touch the place where Baba had walked back and stood to ask for my letter. Because in their mind, that was now a holy spot. No, because it said he was conscious of me, or of anybody, that somehow it was a place elevated for that second in more consciousness. For that second. In that second, God knew someone by name. That's what it represented. I thought about it for a long, long time. It had nothing to do with me. It was a secondary experience that somehow heaven knows you by name. And don't tell me that's not what healing is about. One of the reasons we truly break down is to be put back together again. Is that we go through the journey of being put back together again consciously. And to discover that weave with holiness, to decide, I want to weave this together with, I want to discover that my weave is with my soul. I'm not just an animal. I'm not just flesh and bone. I want to see the power of my soul come into this. Which is why we break apart. We break apart. We're in bodies that are designed to age and to break apart, and we cannot be surprised when that happens. When we fall into MS, and we fall into cancer, and we fall into the various illnesses that this body is so capable of producing. But when we tell ourselves something like, I have to draw. I must have my drawing. Here's my building. So get used to my building. This is garbage. I need my pen. Okay. And this is the difference. So this is vertical thinking. This is soul. This is the soul's floor. This is soul level. These are the soul's floors. And this is the ego, horizontal. Okay? So the ego lives on the lower level, and the soul lives on the higher floor in this building, in consciousness. And it's really important to give it, because the rules in the residency are different. The house rules are different. In the lower level, the house rules. So an illness that cannot be healed here, the healing medical systems are different on the higher level. Are you with me? And if you stay down here, you can only use the chemical systems. You are bound to, in the horizontal world, the healing of time, space, chemical, ingredients, because that's this mentality. And your soul doesn't kick in. It's the last part of you. Your ego is dominant. And you're always asking how and why, and that doesn't make sense, and da-da-da-da. And when someone talks to you about the soul or the mystical properties, it sounds good in theory, but you will say, show me how that works. And you don't get that you are how that works. And I can't show you how you work. You have to show you how you work. You have to. I can't show you how you work. I can't show you your integrity, can I? I can't show you your capacity to be kind. I can't show you that. Only you can show yourself that. So what I can tell you is that up here, as you get to your soul, that you have these choices to decide. I can trust down here. I can go with logic. If a physician said, well, you can try this treatment, this treatment, this treatment, this treatment, and you think, okay, and then the physician says to you, but this is the outcome, or you can say, I don't know. I'll go this far down this road, this Camino with this road with you, but then I'm stepping on the Camino. And you're on your own. I am going to decide here that the outcome you tell me is not the outcome I'm going for. Now, I was told once that I would end up in a wheelchair. In fact, I just told Robert that. And I haven't told anybody those kinds of stories. That I would end up in a wheelchair because of a condition. And I looked at this person who's an expert on what I had. And I thought, what am I going to do here? And I decided, nah, I don't think so. And, as I got up and left, I said to him, I wouldn't talk to anybody like that again if I were you. Really. And I walked out, But I know what hopelessness feels like. I know exactly what it feels like. And I know what it's like to be told, you got nowhere to go. I know what that's like. So I know what the horizontal world is like. And I know when you get to this, and you decide, do I go with the ego, or do I go with the soul? And I know that in that moment, it's like Saint Benedict, the Benedictines. When Benedict says, if you're going to make a decision, you better know how to make a decision. Joyce, Kleenex. Yeah. Thank you. Joycey's my resource go-to girl. She's the ultimate resource companion. That how you make a decision with your soul. Your ego will always tell you, well, it may be in this, and your ego lets you go back. And what your ego also lets you do, which is a huge, huge drain. You want to know what makes you sick? Is that your ego will allow you and encourage you to blame others. Will encourage you to blame others. Your ego does this. Here you are. And what your ego does is it encourages you to make choices and then doubt yourself. And then after you make a choice, how the outcome is that you will then blame others and go after others. And when you do that, you don't get what you're doing to yourself. And you're hemorrhaging. You're actually hemorrhaging yourself. And you're poisoning others along the way. And you're hemorrhaging. And you don't get what you're doing. You don't get that you're poisoning the field. Maybe poisoning your family. Maybe you're poisoning your coworkers. But you're creating you're toxic. You are poisonous and you don't get it. And you're deciding and you don't get it. And oftentimes this kind of person, you start justifying what you're doing, and that's where pride comes in and that's where ego comes in. Okay, now where the soul comes in, and Benedict will say, now, you weren't ready to even make that decision. Look at the way you're behaving. Look at the way you're behaving. You can't even handle a choice. You can't even look at your behavior. It's costing you. This behavior is costing you. Your behavior shouldn't cost you like this. Now think about that. Your behavior shouldn't drain you. It should be rather like, when I am making a decision, this is Benedictine, no matter what it is, think of yourself as standing on a bridge, and whether you decide, how am I going to eat from now on? Am I going to eat consciously, or if I'm going to continue to just shove anything in my mouth? Or how am I going to treat others? Or whatever. Or am I going to change wearing colors because colors are vibrations? And I'm going to start to get very conscious about the vibration I wear. I don't care what it is. Or am I going to start cleaning up after myself? I don't care what it is. Because every decision makes a difference. When you have to go through the decision very, very intimately, because you realize I have to actually live this decision. I have to live it. There's no going back. If I decide to be this person, there's no going back. Your ego will always draw you back to the more powerless position. So Benedict will say, you know what? Whatever big decision, whatever decision you make, think of it. What's a small decision to you? I mean, if you really thought about it, decisions are big deals. And you make it, and what Benedict says is you cross the bridge and you don't look back. And you're entering into the world where you are a different you. You are that decision. So if you decide for a fact, to say, I'm going to heal this. I'm healing this. Let's take on the major league. I'm healing this. Where that's it. I'm done with this bitterness. Or that's it. I'm done with feeling like this despair. Or whatever. These are major league. I'm done. I'm done. The world I am going to enter when I cross this bridge, it's not going to have that in it. That's it. I'm done. Benedict says you cross the bridge, and whatever circumstance you are in, you now look at it like everything in my world from that point on is serving the end of that. It just doesn't exist anymore in that same way. And I will not allow myself to dwell in that anymore because it's not there. That world is not there. And this isn't a mental trick. This is that I have now released that suffering. I have released it. I don't dwell in that it's not. I've released it. I don't allow myself to dwell. I have said to God, that's over. It's over. I'm not asking why anymore. I'm not asking you to change my world anymore so that the people who brought this to me are not. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not asking to change that kind of world. This is the difference in this world and that. So, enough of that.